Recall the hasElement function. So what this did was it took as input a vector v and a number r, and then it gave as output true if r appeared in v, and it gave as output false if r did not appear in v. So let me just write that again in the way that worked. HasElement v comma r output some Boolean value, some true false value. And then how did I do it? I said b equals false by default. And then let me do it the opposite way from how I did it before. Let me say for x equals v, okay, as opposed to for I from 1 to length of v. If x is equal to r, b equals true. So I want to show you one way that doesn't affect whether this function is right or wrong. It's still right, just like before, but I want to show you a way that we can make this function more efficient. And that's using the command break, B-R-E-A-K, or return. So those are two very similar things. Let me talk about the difference between them. So say I put the phrase break here. What does that do? So what break does is when MATLAB reads this command, so it only reads that command if it's inside of this if statement, so it only reads that command if x is equal to r. When MATLAB reads this command, it leaves whatever the most recent for loop is, or while loop, when we get to while loops. So in this case, it leaves this and comes down here and then goes to end. So when I'm just writing down some vector by hand, this isn't going to make any difference in how fast we see the function running. But if you imagine that the vector v is some length 1 million or 10 million vector, then this could make a huge difference in efficiency, having this break here. Because what it does is it's like saying, once we know that it's true, the output is going to be true, so we just skip down to here. So let me test it and see if it works. I saved it, I go back to the command window, and now I do hasElement, and let's try 1, 4, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and let's ask, is 7 in there? I get the answer 1, which stands for true. So far, so good. Looks like it's working. Let's try a number that's not in here. How about 3? Yep, I get false. So this looks like it's working. So let me give you an example of what the break is doing. Let me go here and write a display. And so inside this display, I'm just going to put some string. So I'm going to say new line reached. Okay, I'm going to save it. And now let's run it again. How about with 3? So it got new line reached 5 times. Why is that? Because it looked at 1, looked at 4, looked at 6, looked at 7, looked at 8. Looked at all of those trying to find a 3. So let me show it to you again, now with looking for the number 6. So now it only showed up twice. Why is that? Well, let's look back at the code. Here it tries to find, is the number x, is that equal to r? So it asks, is 1 equal to 6? No, it's not, so it skips this inside of the if statement and displays new line reached. Then it goes to the next element, 4. It asks, does 4 equal 6? No, it doesn't, so it skips this inside of the if statement and goes to new line reached. Then it comes to 6, and now the big difference is that this number equals this number. So it goes inside the if statement. It sets b equal to true. And then this break says, go down here. Okay, so just as an example, let me go down here and say end of the program. Okay, I've saved it. Now let's run the exact same thing again. I got it by hitting the up arrow. Now new line reached, end of program, because when it got to this break, it left the for loop. Okay, so it left all of this, and then it got down here to end of the program. So that's how break works. There's a very similar one called return. And what return does is it just ends the function. So whatever the output value is when MATLAB sees the word return, that's what gets returned by the function. So let me run this, let me save it, and let me run the same function again. So what's the difference? We still had new line reached 2 times, but now it never got to that line that said display the end of the program, because what break does, break leaves the most recent loop, in this case this for loop. If I had a while loop, it would also leave the while loop. What return does, it does something more drastic. It leaves the entire function. So it stops the function and returns whatever value b had when it saw return. So just as an example, if I were to put return out here, then it wouldn't work anymore. Let me run the exact same thing. Okay, nothing got displayed. There were no new lines reached. There was no end of the program. It just immediately returned false because it set b equal to false, and then it returned. What if I had return before the b equals false? What would happen? Okay, then nothing gets returned. It tries to return b, but b has no value at that point, so it just ends the function, and there's no answer associated with it.